hold himself from speaking. You don't like what we have to say, Job, but we can't help but tell you. Sometimes that begins a rather unpleasant conversation. And so it would be here. One thing about these fellows is they're quite sure that they're right and that they have the help Job needs. And what's interesting to note is, for me and I hope for all of us, is that as we go through these speeches, we have to remember that they're not right. They were assured that they were right, but they were not. And that ought to give us some humility and some pause as we think about how we deal with other people. What it's saying, in effect, is, Job, you need what we have to tell you. Now, beginning in verse 3, behold, thou hast instructed many, and hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was fallen, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. But now it is come upon thee, and thou faintest, it toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. You have a hard time taking your own medicine, Job. The word there is interesting in my translation. There are a couple of different words for strengthened. He says in verse 3, thou hast instructed many. You have another translation of that word instruct in verse 3? The word there really literally means to chastise with blows. So it seems to me that what he's saying is you have had sometimes to get on folks, Job, and to correct people. That's your turn. He said you have strengthened. Again, that word strengthened in verse 3 literally means to harden. You have sometimes had to toughen people up, in other words. Your words have upholden, verse 4, him that was falling, and strengthened, same word in English, but a different word in the original. And this word means to give courage. Job, you yourself have had to pump people up with courage. Sometimes you've had to toughen them up with hard words. But now that it's come to you, you are touchy, and I can tell already you're not going to like what I have to say. So that's how Eliphaz begins his speech. Then you come to verse 6. Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and the uprightness of thy ways? Here's a modern speech translation. The Revised English Bible reads, does your piety give you no assurance? Does your blameless life afford you no hope? And you have to decide, do you think he's being earnest here or sarcastic? In other words, he's saying, Job, you have always lived a good life. Doesn't that give you anything to stand on? Or maybe he's being rather sarcastic. Oh, you're Mr. Blameless. So why are you in such a bad state now? Maybe the latter seems to fit for you. I don't know. You can decide. But we come to the fundamental part of this speech, and really the fundamental part of the whole of what these three men are going to say over these 20, 30 chapters. He says in verse 7, remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off? Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. By the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his nostrils they are consumed. The roaring of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, the teeth of the young lion are broken. The old lion perisheth for lack of prey, and the stout lion's whelps are scattered abroad. You know, we said that Eliphaz seems to be the leader of this group, and I believe that's good evidence for that. In the first place, as he ends this speech, he talks about how he's saying what they all have decided is good. He seems to be the one who speaks first, he speaks most, he's the spokesman, he's the one. God, in fact, at the end of this story, addresses Eliphaz and the other friends through him. So And I think he does set the keynote. He sets the theme. And the theme is, whoever perished being innocent. When's that ever happen? Innocent people don't suffer like you're suffering, Joe. And so what's the natural conclusion? You're guilty. You're guilty. That's just logic. Well, it's not exactly logic. And there's a flaw in that logic. There are other factors that might be contributing to that. That's not what they're not looking at here. It's the idea that to them this is simple. Nobody would suffer like you're suffering. And obviously this is God's word. And God will not do this to somebody unless they deserve it. And to suggest otherwise is to cast aspersion on God. So that's where they're coming from, Brother Ruff.
I was just looking at he says in verse 8, in my way mine reads, according to what I have seen. So he's using an observation of what he's experienced in life. This is how God deals with people that seen things.
Right.
And I find that interesting there. This is what he has seen.
And they'll bring that up more than one time, as this thing goes on. They'll appeal to their experience.
And it seems like, too, when you look at his speech compared to Bildad and Zophar, he's probably more delicate.
Yeah.
He's probably
No question.
Yeah.
No question. He's certainly more diplomatic as he starts. Bildad, we're going to see in chapter 11, just comes along with the sledgehammer. Yeah. And, but, of course, we also remember chapter 22, this same Eliphaz is going to have some really mean things to say, as he seems to be worked up himself about this whole matter. But this is the fundamental premise. You reap what you sow. Anybody want to argue with that? Anybody want to say you don't reap what you sow? Well, that is a vital principle, isn't it? But it's not without exception, and it's and the timing of the matter, you see, is also significant. Like the fellow said, it's logic can be a deceiving thing if you misuse it. One illustration, I'm not a logician, but one illustration that I've heard you go something like this. Here we'll set up a syllogism, they call it. When it rains, the sidewalk gets wet. Point 2, the sidewalk is wet. Therefore, it is rained. Well, what do you think about that? You're gonna buy that one, or you're gonna maybe send it back for some repairs? How do you know somebody didn't wash the car and turn on the sprinkler? Just because the sidewalk's wet doesn't mean that's the only reason why it got wet, because it rained. Things that might seem on the surface to be, well, obviously this is true. But it's one point that I hope we'll get from our study of the book of Job, be reminded of, and that is that there are times when people make life in this world too simple, and they make the working of God too simple. It's one lesson that I think we learn from the book of Job, is that life is not simple. I think that there are big principles about how God repays evil that are true. But God has not promised to send a flood every time men get wicked. In fact, he said he's not going to do that. But he's also promised he's going to answer every sin in his time. But he also has not promised that the wicked will be the only ones in this life who will suffer. So, the fundamental mistake is looking at things so simply to say, if a man is suffering, therefore it must be on this scale. There's no way this can be the work of God, and if it's the work of God, then surely Job is deserving of it. He's guilty. And as Rodney pointed out, I've seen that life, he said. I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of these lions that wound up starving to death. God has a way of doing that, But labeling the providence of God in real time is another matter. And that's a fundamental problem that we see here from Job's friends. Any more point or question about these verses? I think it's really important. Verse 7 is a very important premise. Yes, sir.
But, it's a simple and, obvious conclusion here for us being students. We know that God is still got his hands protecting Job through all this. He told Satan,
Right.
do what you can do, just don't kill him, and to paraphrase it, short term. But it's a reminder for all of us that no matter how bad it's going right now, God still got us. He's covering us. It could be a whole lot worse.
Because Job might have thought it couldn't get worse. And Job also might have felt offended, but you're exactly right. He was offended. And he's going to learn that as we go along. I think about that sometimes at the end of the book when God calls Job by name. I don't know, maybe this is a silly question. I might ask you to answer out. Do you ever think about the fact that God knows your name? I mean, how many people are there? How many people have ever been? There have been billions and billions of humans. God knows your name. Your name. He knows your circumstance. And whatever we've been through, God knows you. Not a sparrow falls, the Lord said, but he doesn't know. Yes, sir.
We were talking last time about people that commit suicide.
Yeah.
And Job could be a great example for us, that the Lord, our Savior, is not going to put anything in front of us. We can just continue to believe in him, put your trust in him.
And that other voice that tells you it's hopeless and useless and you might as well quit, we know whose voice that is. But you raise a good point too, Jeremy, about the fact, we know that it's too simple to say, whoever perished being innocent. Shouldn't they have known that also? Now I realize they were much further back in history. Had they never heard of Abel? I guess they could have said, well, yes, but Abel was murdered. It wasn't fire from God that destroyed him. But nevertheless, he was an innocent man who suffered. And sometimes innocent people have and do and will suffer. But it does not mean that's the end of the story, or that God doesn't see, or that he doesn't care. There's an interesting thing, and we'll get to this, I hope, soon, in one of Job's speeches where he offers a reason why maybe the friends were willing to accept this, what seems on the surface to be such a obviously too simplistic view of God's word. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. Any further thought or question about the first 11 verses here?
Wes, people in the first century even thought something like that, like what?
Sure.
Remember what one was blind? Well, Lord, who seen him? It was him or his mother or his parents.
They still do.
And
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. I have known people in my own family that believe that.
I studied here at the building with a guy we met in the community, and we had a lot of things to chase around. But one thing the guy told me, he said he traveled a lot with his job, and he said he said, yes, and I know about a church that he mentioned somewhere, I don't know where it was, but a church out here in the community. He said that thing they built a building, they burned down twice. He said that ought to tell them something. And I asked him, I said, reckon what he told them, that they need a smoke alarm, or that they got an arsonist in the community, or yeah, exactly. Maybe they need electricity. But the idea is, but that was his thinking. Well, that's obviously God telling him that. You don't think that God's people's their house of meeting could burn down? But you're right, that underlies a lot of thinking. And it's just, if we look at the book of Job, it obliterates that idea. You can't sometimes people do something. You can see a guy and he's cut his life short likely by 20 years because he's a slave to the bottle. And he's just pickled his liver and he's just ruined his health. and it's not difficult. A child can see and draw a line from here to there. But how does that explain people who die of cirrhosis of the liver who've never taken a drink? That also happens. I'm not suggesting we don't reap what we sow. Even in this life, what I am suggesting is it's not always that simple, and the book of Job's a great reminder of that point. Yes, sir, you have.
Another guy that lived his life, pretty good life, but, Lazarus, he lived a very, very painful life. He had sores all over him, but, Eliphaz says only sinners are punished. You see where Lazarus went with that.
Sure. Been many examples. That's right. That's exactly right. I was trying to think of an example that these men would have been aware of, and certainly they would have been aware at least of Abel example. My guess is they were aware of more examples of that. It's just sometimes we have a selective memory. I have seen things that agree with what I want to be true. I don't want to see the other things. Very good. Okay. Now, in verse 12, again, the speech is chapters 4 and 5, right? So, the latter part of chapter 4 contains this highly unusual, I call it I had a dream speech, in which he says, now a thing was secretly brought to me, and mine ear received a little thereof. In thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones to shake. And a spirit passed before my face, the hair of my flesh stood up, it stood still, and I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes, there was silence, and I heard a voice saying, shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his Maker? Behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels he charged with folly. How much less in them that dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, which are crushed before the moth. They are destroyed from morning to evening. They perish forever without any regarding it. Doth not their excellency which is in them go away? They die even without wisdom. Wow. Not only does he draw from his experience, but he has a private experience, this private dream that he thinks to be relevant. It is more like a nightmare, isn't it? Like a night terror. The NIV reads, a word was secretly brought to me, mine ears caught a whisper of it, and amid disquieting dreams of the night, when deep sleep falls on people, fear and trembling seized me and made all my bones shake. A spirit glided past my face, and the hair on my body stood on end. It stopped, but I could not tell what it was. A form stood before my eyes, and I heard a hushed voice. Wow. And then he describes the message that this spirit brought. Can a mortal person be more righteous than God, or can purity of the valiant exceed that of his Maker? What do you think is the message there? How does he apply this message? Can a mortal person be more righteous than God? Who do you suppose this person is? How does this apply to Job as far as Eliphaz is concerned?
Job, you think you're better than God?
You think you're better than God? Why would that even come up? What would suggest you think you're better than God?
Because he's helped so many people. He's,
Maybe so.
you told everybody to do this, do that.
But think about the particular situation here. That here is Job, who is being obviously punished by God for his sin. But what won't he do? Won't fess up. Won't fess up. You think you're more righteous than God? You acting like God somehow has wronged you? You think you're righteous in this dispute? Isn't it something that that message came through this dream just at this time? Notice again, verse 18. Indeed, since he doesn't even trust his servants and charges his angels with error, how much less confidence does he have in those who dwell in houses of clay? Notice how in this message, how men are sort of seen as lowly creatures, just to maybe a mat to somebody rub their feet on. How much less confidence in those who dwell in houses of clay, who are formed of the foundation of the dust, can perish like a moth, dejected between morning and evening, defeated, I'm sorry, between morning and evening. They're just gone in a minute. And when they're gone, who cares? Who notices? Interesting question to me is, what's going on here? What did he really see? Where did this come from? One fellow, at least I read, thought it was just a dream. He said, Eliphaz didn't claim this was a revelation. He was just telling Job about a dream. That's a very strange way to look at this story, to me. You think he was just bringing up a dream he had last night? Just, what if Job told him, well, listen, you need to quit eating so much pepperoni right before you go to bed? That's the answer to that. Saul. No, I don't think that he's just talking about a dream he had. Do you think it was a dream from God? But that Eliphaz had twisted the message. I guess that's possible. God did speak to people. In ages prior to the completion of his word, he gave revelation through dreams. That is true. But if it was a message from God, then clearly it has been misapplied, because God makes it plain more than one time that Job is not a hypocrite. He is, in fact, blameless and upright, fears God, and avoids evil. So it would be a twisting of the message. I tell you, the more I look at this dream and the more I've thought about it through the years, the more I wonder if this is not a satanic message. It certainly fits better. We're going to see later how that Job said that he was scared with dreams. I think I know where those came from too. And so here's this picture of a spirit placing into the mind of Job this message, which is obviously degrading to human beings. I'm not placing Job, placing Eliphaz. And also just at the right time to help bolster and convince Eliphaz, yes, go attack Job, because a mortal man is an unworthy, low creature, and Job is just filled with arrogance. I don't know. You'll have to make up your mind. But it seems to me that fits pretty well the story here. What was it that Micaiah over in 1 Kings chapter 22, he had that vision in which a lying spirit went forth to fill the mouth of the prophets. Maybe this is a similar situation that we have here. Any question about the 4th chapter of this dream? What happens is that Eliphaz takes this private experience, it reinforces his beliefs, and then it makes him all that much more bold to stand. There's a lesson there too. Today, when we have the completed word, and I do not believe that God is whispering to me or to you privately information that he's not telling the rest of us, but he speaks to us through the word that is sufficient, all sufficient. We still find people who rely on private revelations and private information. The Lord led me, the Lord told me, a voice told me. It's still a pretty good question. How do you know it was the Lord? How do you know when the devil talking to you? I have good reason to believe the Lord's not talking to us in that way. So if you did hear something, I have an idea where it came from. Be that as it may. Chapter 5, he continues. He comes back to this private, to this personal, I should say, revelation. I have seen Call thee now, if there be any that will answer thee. And to which of the saints wilt thou turn? For wrath killeth the foolish man, and envy slayeth the silly one. Let me pause there a minute. You know the translation of the word there for saints?
Holy ones.
Holy one. I wonder who he's talking about there as well. I'm not sure 100%. Holy one being holy men. Could it be heavenly messengers? I think it's a good way to summarize it. One fellow wrote that what Eliphaz is saying is there's nobody on God's side that would back you up, Joe. Maybe he's got this dream in mind. You know, heaven is revealing to me about your case, but nobody back you up. God's not speaking to you. He said in verse 2, wrath kills the foolish man and envy slays the silly one. I wonder if he's not talking about Job there. I heard your ranting, raving speech there, as we would call it chapter 3, and he said you talk like a foolish, silly man. I love when they kill you. Let me tell you what I've seen, Eliphaz said. Verse 3, I have seen the foolish taking root, but suddenly I cursed his habitation. Why? Because he didn't last. Looked like he was taking root, but you know, that's the way the wicked are. They're here and then gone. And I cursed their habitation. He says, his children are far from safety. They are crushed in the gate. Neither is there any to deliver them. What happened to Job's children? Whose harvest the hungry eat up, and takes it even out of the thorns. And the robber swallows up their substance. Although affliction comes not forth of the dust, neither doth trouble spring out of the ground, yet man is born unto trouble as sparks fly upward. It's not the ground that brings the sin. It's not the dust we were made of where the sin is found. It's in the choices we make, Joe. That's the way men are. They're rebels, and that's what you are. You're a rebel, and you're getting what comes to rebels. So, in verse 8, he continues, I would seek unto God. I think the implication there is, well, I'll tell you what I'd do if I were you. I'll tell you what I'd do if I were in your shoes. I'd seek after God. Fellow made a good point one time. He said, you need to be careful about using phrases like that. I'll tell you what I'd do if I were in your shoes, because you ain't in their shoes, number one. So just have a little humility, I think. It's not bad to give advice. And sometimes I need good advice. Sometimes I need blunt advice. But just in giving that kind of advice, remember this, you're not in that fellowship. So be humble, be thoughtful. But you can tell that Eliphaz is speaking down to Job here. I seek to God. That's what I do. I get right with God, Job. That'd be solving your problem. And unto God I commit my cause, which doeth great things and unsearchable, things marvelous and without number, who gives rain upon the earth, and he sends waters upon the fields, to set up on high those that be low, and those which mourn may be exalted to safety. He disappoints the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. He takes the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the froward is carried headlong. They meet with darkness in the daytime, and grope in the noonday, as in the night. But he saveth the poor from the sword, from their mouth, he says, and from the hand of the mighty. So the poor have hope, and iniquity stops her mouth. You know, there's a lot of that we say amen to, couldn't we? And that is the point to make, that Eliphaz And these other friends say a lot of good things. The principles that they teach are generally true. The problem is what? What's the problem with saying these things?
You better know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they misapplied them with Job, haven't they? I will seek to God. I will commit my cause to God. Anybody think that's not good advice?
The sin to the wrong person.
But Job had done that. You know, it's interesting that there's one quotation of the book of Job in the New Testament. You remember what it is? The book of Job is quoted one time in the New Testament. In 1 Corinthians chapters 3, I think it is. And verse 19. Paul is talking about the contrast between the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God. And he says, the wisdom of the world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He takes the wise in their own craftiness. He's quoting Eliphaz. So the principles that are found here, it's not wrong to make proper application of it because there's a lot of truth in this. The problem was he was pegging Job as a hypocrite and a liar and a scoundrel, and that was just not true. Yes, sir.
They can't seem to understand that bad things happen to good people. They miss that whole message to this whole book.
Absolutely.
It's just,
Doesn't happen.
it
Does
doesn't
not happen. Cannot happen. Yeah, exactly. Well, so why don't you respond to the mercy of God? Then in verse 17, another great principle. How happy is he, is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty. There's a very similar statement in Proverbs 3, and I think the Hebrew writer quotes it. Most people think the quote from Hebrews is from the Proverbs. I guess it could be another quote. But at any rate, what a great principle. Despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty, El Shaddai. For he makes sore and binds up. He wounds and his hands make whole. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7 there shall be no evil touch thee. So he's going to apply here how the mercy of God will help Job. In famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. Thou shalt be hid from the scourge of the tongue, neither shalt thou be afraid of destruction when it comes, and destruction and famine thou shalt laugh. Neither shalt thou be afraid of the beast of the earth, for thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and with the beasts of the field, they shall be at peace with thee. This idea of you'll be at peace with creation, Job. The animate and inanimate world will be at your service. And thou shalt know thy tabernacle shall be in peace. And thou shalt visit thy habitation and shall not sin. Thou shalt know that thy seed shall be great, and thine offspring as the grass of the earth. Thou shalt come to thy grave in full age, like as a shock of corn cometh in his season. If you do what? You just get right with God. That's your problem. You just need to get right with God. All these things come to you. If you just get right with God. Don't despise Job, the chastening of the Lord. I like what Brad wrote about that. He said the Bible does teach that God sometimes chastens us in this life for our sin. When we suffer, we should examine our lives to see whether or not we've committed any sin which God may be chastening us for. I think that's a good point. However, we must again realize this is not the case with all suffering. That is a lesson that obviously the book of Job would teach.
You know, I can think that he was probably being hammered by his friends like this, and he's probably just searching his soul. Is there something I'm overlooking? Is there something I'm missing that I may have done or said or thought? And, you know, he didn't say he had never sinned. It's kind of like, the way I look at it, it's like, he knew he had sinned. He's a man. But I haven't sinned in such a way that I deserve this.
Yeah.
What have I done to deserve this?
And it's almost insulting for Eliphaz to come along and tell Job this like he would have thought of this. Like he hadn't already wrapped his brain, like he had spent hours in prayer. Been sitting down on that ash heap, contemplating every aspect of his life and saying, where did I leave God? What happened to me? And when you've done all that and you've searched your soul and you reach the point where you say, I cannot find it.
Yeah, and you're wanting to make the correction if there is. You know, you're looking for that.
But here's a critical point, though, Rodney. You know that you cannot make confession of what is not so, because that's a lie. And so that's another thing that we'll see throughout the book of Job.
You don't do nothing, you don't confess.
Because to Job, it would be a loss of integrity to take the shortcut to agree to whatever they say. You can't do that. So there's the problem. There's the struggle that Job is in. But on the other side, all the questions are answered. In verse 27, look, we have thought all this through, and what we've said is true, so you please listen and learn for your own good. I take it, I don't know about all the logistics of this, but I take it to mean during those 7 days when they were silent, I think as far as Job was concerned, they were talking amongst themselves. And they had come up with this idea that has to be what's going on here. That this fellow that we've always thought so well of must secretly be a scoundrel. And God's found him out. And our job now is to convince him to wave the white flag. And Job is saying, that's not true, and I can't say it is true. So there's the next 30 chapters.
I think I'm trying to recall later on, he tried to sell them. Show me.
Oh, yeah.
Show me.
Yeah, absolutely he will. Yeah.
If I missed something, show me.
We're going to see a lot of repetition in these thoughts here. But again, every word of this is given to us by God. We said earlier in the book, you know, it's interesting. It's like Ecclesiastes. You know, Solomon will talk sometimes in the voice of the worldly and the materialist. Everything that's said in Ecclesiastes is not intended to be taken as what we are to believe. Better a living dog than a dead lion. Nobody who's spiritual thinks that way. That's not the voice of the spiritual in its context, but it's all true in its context. That's an accurate representation of the way the world is thinking. And the same is true about the book of Job. We're going to see these philosophies in the mouths of these friends, and sometimes in the words of Job. They're all inspired, but they're not inspired men. It's an inspired record. And we have to decide whether or not what's said is true, or sometimes whether what's said that is true is whether it's properly applied or not. And that's our challenge as students of the book of Job. So, question or point further about chapter 5, 4 to 5. Okay, what we'll see in the next section then, 6 through 8, is Job's first response to his friends. We saw Job speak early in the book. He spoke to his wife. He spoke maybe what's a prayer. We saw in chapter 3, at his first response, I don't think it was to his friends, unless it was to their silence, but just words that came forth in their presence. But this is the first time Job has spoken since his friends have spoken. And Eliphaz, as we said, has sort of laid out the groundwork for all the friends. So this will be now Job's response. And I would love to get into this right now, and I'm looking up there and I'm thinking we got about 2 minutes. And I'm trying to decide, do I, you know, I don't think I wanna start and then do that, but we are gonna have to pick up the pace a bit to try to finish with this. But I hope that you don't feel like we wasted time. But we will talk about, and please do read over particularly, these 3 chapters, and we'll try to cover that, Lord willing, Wednesday, as we look at Job's first response, which is rich, and then chapter 8, which is Bildad's first speech, which is also, I think, instructive. Okay, thank you very much. We'll pick up